Okay, we'll just wait for people to log in. I'll start at 1 o'clock. We'll just wait a couple of minutes and let everybody. Hello to those of you who are joining us. Okay, people starting to come in now. Okay, we might get started. Welcome everybody. I'll just share my screen. Welcome everybody to our webinar with a focus on safety culture. This being the final day of Farm Safety Week, we're really excited to have a conversation about safety culture and some of the ingredients that help us create safe farms in our communities. My name is Dr. Jacquie Cotton. I'm a lecturer and researcher here at the National Centre for Farmer Health. And my colleagues, Dr. Amity Latham and Jessie Adams, will be joining me today as we discuss a number of different aspects of farm safety and the culture that surrounds making our farms safer. So welcome to you all. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands in which we record this webinar today, the Gunditjmara people, and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. And welcome to all of you joining us from different areas across Australia and Victoria. So we'll start off, I'd like to start off today talking about culture and safety culture in particular, so that we can together reflect on farm safety culture in Australia or in the area in which you live, as we address and we do some questions and answers at the end of this session. So If you have a particular question, you can pop it in the chat, and we will monitor those, and we'll try and address those in a Q&A session at the end of these presentations. So, first of all, what does it take to what are the key ingredients to a culture of safety on Australian farms? Let's have a look at that. Well, first of all, we need to all be across collectively, be across the issue, and recognise that farm safety and injuries and fatalities in Australia are and have been and continue to be an issue. These are some numbers that have come out of both Farm Safe Australia and Safe Work Australia. And I encourage you all, Farm Safe have recently released their report on the trends in farm safety and some of the exciting initiatives that they've been involved in the last year and in the years to come as they address their national strategy. But you can see here that some of these statistics are suggesting that our fatalities in agriculture are mainly male and over the age of 45. But you can see here there is a proportion, around about 13%, that are under 15 years. Now, these statistics are, we would describe them as most likely an underestimate because they are reliant upon coronial data and media reporting of injuries and fatalities. So we anticipate that these are the tip of the iceberg, which is why we're here and why we're wanting to talk about this. You can see there are a couple of common agents of fatality, and a couple of these, particularly tractors and quad bikes, jostle for the top spot in terms of which are causing the most fatalities. And at the moment, tractors are at the top, but quad bikes have certainly been there in recent years. Agriculture is astonishingly overrepresented in terms of number of fatalities per 100,000 workers. So as a workforce, you can see here that the fatalities, or the rate of fatality, is nearly double that of transport. The next closest, which is transport and warehousing, agriculture is has nearly double the rate of fatalities. So whilst this number has been going down, this is something that we certainly want to continue to reduce. To give you some context of the impact of farm injury and fatality and health, wellbeing and safety in general, we like to use this image to really display or illustrate the impact of injury, illness or disability. And in the context of today's discussion, I want to draw the community impact to your attention, but also these other impacts, family impact and individual, these are all aspects that make up the culture of farm safety. So a farmer being injured doesn't just impact the individual. There is in fact a cultural impact of either fatality or permanent disability. Farming communities, farmers play such an important role in many aspects of their community. So for those of you who might be new to talking about culture, I thought we'd like to just discuss what it even is. And I thought this breaks it down quite nicely into the things we can see and the things that we can't see and that are harder to change. So the things we can see are behaviours and the physical things we measure, like fatalities and injury, for example, and the things we're using. So the PPE we might use, or the physical equipment that we can visibly see whether or not there's a change in whether or not someone's using something or not. The things that are harder to change are beliefs, values, and assumptions. These are more deeply ingrained in the culture of an individual's family. There are many layers to the things that influence beliefs, values, and assumptions. So I want you to think about some of the things we're talking about today in terms of the things that might be easier to change on the surface to some of these harder, deeper, more ingrained aspects of culture that collectively we need to work together to help address some of these. So what does it mean for farm safety? Well, what we do know is that on a farm, each farm has its own culture. So that culture on an individual farm might be influenced by a number of different things, and we know that includes the farmer or a farmer themselves, peers, so that includes friends, neighbours, and the wider community, family, and in particular intergenerational change, and which Amity is going to, I'm really looking forward to having a deeper conversation about family and how that contributes to the culture of an individual farm, given that so many of our farms are family owned and operated, which differentiates them from commercial enterprises or large commercial enterprises. We have industry agents such as trusted advisors, agricultural retail, and peak industry bodies that represent our diverse enterprise types that make up agriculture, but also government, and that includes agriculture, it includes health and education. There are many systems involved in the things that influence an individual farm. Now, an individual farm is part, though, of a broader culture, a broader industry culture. So there are different layers to farm safety culture that make it such a complex conversation to have. So whilst on the previous slide, I've talked about an individual farm, the individual and the individuals on that farm make up only one part of the ways in which collectively we influence safety culture in agriculture. You can see here that there are many layers to the roles that different aspects of our lives and different aspects of agriculture play in safety culture. That includes everyone from, so you can see the individual is there, but they're surrounded by their family, friends, and social networks. They're interacting with organisations and social institutions and other workplaces in many cases. There's the community, the relationships between organisations, both farming related and personal, sports, education, the community plays a big role. The way the community talks about safety, and we'll talk about that hopefully in our Q&A, the way the community talks about safety has huge potential in shifting the narrative around safety on farm. And at the very top here, we have public policy, and this is where our lawmakers and government come in. But not only that, public policy relates also to the resources that are available to help us and help farmers and farming families and organisations make changes and make safety changes on farm. So as I mentioned, there are a few things that enable change in safety culture, and as you can see here, social networks and that support positive attitudes towards safety, normalising conversation around safety, assistance with health and safety issues. We know that farmers, many farmers know what, are aware of the many hazards on farm and aware of the work, health and safety danger, but simply need some assistance with where to start and how do we start implementing changes. And this can be done through sharing of best practice, and this is where our peer-to-peer, some of the best ways we learn as communities and as cultures is through our peers and through conversations and through demonstration and sharing of stories. So this is a really important aspect, and particularly in helping build awareness of the problems and helping people reflect on what are the motivators for action, or how do I motivate others? How do I have a conversation with others to help them be safer? So as we move through today's sessions, I want you to have a think about what do you think is the biggest influence on farm safety culture, and what is your role in changing the way we address farm safety as a community? Where do you fit? What circle do you fit in? And how can you start to positively influence or positively impact the culture of farm safety? So I'm going to hand over now to our presenters for today. We have Jessie Adams. Jessie is a PhD in the final stretch of her PhD, looking at safety behaviours and hazards faced by children on farms. So she'll talk to you about that. And we have Dr. Amity Latham, who is a research assistant with us, and an educator, a farmer, a social changer. I think you'll find her presentation reflecting on intergenerational change within her farming family really thought-provoking and interesting. So I'm looking forward to our conversation as we move through these afterwards. So I'm going to stop sharing so Jessie can share her fabulous work with us all.
Is that working?
Yes, it sure is. Welcome, Jessie.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm Jessie. So as Jackie said, I'm a PhD student here, and I'm looking at the injury risk and safety behaviours of children on Victorian farms. So I'll just talk a little bit about that today. So just to set the scene, I guess people are very well aware that unlike most workplaces, farms are both a home and a place of work. So there's often a blurred distinction between work, the home, personal identity and occupation, which can result in behaviours typically not acceptable within most workplaces occurring. For example, parents taking their children along to work with them, or even depending on their children to perform work. So in my personal experience, I grew up on a beef farm in northeast Victoria, and as these pictures show, I was involved in the farm from a young age. I remember when I was younger, spending hours waiting around the cattle yards, making up games with my sister to pass time while mum and dad were working in the yards. Then when I got a little older, I was there mustering the cattle on my horse and helping in the cattle yards myself. This was obviously a fantastic way to grow up. However, I was oblivious to the fact that my playground was full of hazards, not present in typical households, and I was exposed to the same hazards as the adult workers on the farm in one of the most industries in our country. So I'll just quickly go through some of the injury statistics. So a study recently completed in Australia determined that children under 15 represent 15% of all farm-related fatalities in Australia between 2001 and 2019. And that accounted for 222 deaths. And this statistic has remained very consistent over at least the last 20 years, despite our awareness that these deaths are occurring. Not as much is known about hospitalisation rates, but a report by the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare did report that of the 22,000 farm-related hospitalisations between 2010-11 and 2014-15, over 2,000 of these were children under 15. So the key hazards responsible for these injuries are very well known and present on most of our farms. So as you can see, water bodies, quad bikes, tractors, utes and cars, motorbikes and horses are the key hazards. And these were responsible for 75% of those fatalities between 2001 and 2019. So there are many factors that can contribute to the increased risk of injury on farms overall. In regards to children, we've identified some potential factors that might be influencing the risk of children being at higher risk of injury on farms. So if we just go through these, firstly, child development and exposure to dangerous environments. So children's lack of development increases their risk of injury. And as I said, hazards on farms are typically not present in other households. The risk-taking culture, so the she'll be right or it won't happen to us, attitudes that can be associated with farming in rural communities can be passed down through generations. And it's thought to be this is due to being frequently exposed to dangers, the influence of cultural norms, as well as fatalistic attitudes. Multi-generational farming families. Often children are given responsibility on the farm from a young age. It's part of the lifestyle, and excluding them can be seen as threatening to the continuation of family values and traditions. Constant supervision can be really challenging while parents are performing farm work at the same time. Between 2001 and 2019, over half of the deaths of children on farms had no active supervision at the time. Child labour and lack of regulation. Agriculture accounts for 71% of the world's child labour, and this does vary across the world from deliberate exploitation to the more subtle methods we would see here in Australia. So for example, a child staying home from school for the day to help with shearing. There's been limited targeted farm safety programs. The undue of safe play areas. We know that safe play areas are really effective in removing children from hazards, particularly younger children. And although these have been promoted, the uptake of these appears to be quite low. Financial priorities. The investment in safety is often not a top priority as it competes with investments to increase productivity as well as general family needs. And finally, the underuse of the higher levels of the hierarchy of control. So this would mean reducing injury risk through eliminating or substituting hazards or implementing engineering controls. So the role that all these factors play in child farm related injury hasn't been explored in the Australian context. So to date, we've been interpreting child farm injuries without understanding their actual exposure to farming and the hazards. So we know that children are being injured on farms and the hazards responsible, but we don't have an understanding of their actual engagement with this. So in order to prevent these injuries from occurring, we believe an understanding of this is required. So therefore, that has led to the development of my PhD project. And as part of my study, I've conducted parent and child surveys investigating children's exposure to farming hazards, risk-taking behaviours, attitudes and use of safety measures, and also any experience of farm-related injury. So I'll just present on a couple of findings of the parent survey today that I think are important for us to think about during Farm Safety Week. Just overall, we had 107 parents complete the survey from all over rural Victoria. So firstly, what's our children's role on the farm? So anecdotally in Australia, we know that children are actively involved in farming, but research has yet to investigate the extent of this. We know the culture of growing up on a farm means you're involved in work and expected to contribute to the family business. Children are often relied upon to complete work, but are actually not recognised as official employees on farms. So from my survey results, 94% of children are assisting with farm work. Of these, 35% began working on the farm before they were 5 years old, and then a further 56% before they were 10 years old. Children were completing a really wide range of tasks. However, the top responses of common tasks children do on a farm is checking on livestock, working with large animals, feeding baby animals, and mustering livestock. Parents were then asked if they had concerns about their child assisting with work on the farm, of which 56% did. And a further, 23% responded somewhat likely and 4% extremely likely that their child would experience injury on farm. However, these concerns do not appear to be a key factor when parents were deciding what tasks their child would complete on the farm. As you can see here, those main factors were child's enjoyment, family time and bonding, which is interesting as there's not that many workplaces where parents take their children along for the purpose of bonding. Their need for help, so highlighting families' reliance on their child to help with farm tasks and overall labour, and tasks they completed at a similar age. So this might be demonstrating the generational transfer of farming down the family and how it's passed down through generations. So we also investigated the use of safety measures on farms. So as this table demonstrates, the top safety measures parents are using, around 80%, is rules and supervision. Compulsory use of personal protective equipment and locks, such as on gun cabinets or chemical cabinets, were also commonly used. Interestingly, if we look at something like seat belts, less than 50% are using seat belts. And this kind of just highlights the differences in mindset between being on the farm as opposed to I guess driving around town when we're out and about, because we don't second guess wearing our seatbelt in that environment. And finally, looking at the barriers to implementing some of these safety measures. So the most common barrier parents identified as to the safety measures being implemented was not being aware of what they should be implementing on their farm. 52% of parents stated they didn't believe there was enough education and resources available to assist them with making decisions around that. Other barriers was the influence of others. So this could even be family members, traditions, which is related back to that, and cost and time. So what does this mean and what can we do? We're always going to be faced with the challenge that children are going to be on our farms and actually involved in farming work, as the results of this survey have confirmed. It is a wonderful way to grow up. I certainly loved it, and it provides children with many lifelong skills and important personal qualities. However, it's our responsibility to ensure that this is done in the safest way possible. Farming parents are faced with constant challenges about their child's safety. However, I guess there's some considerations we can think about. Firstly, the use of age-appropriate safety measures. These change as children get older and develop. But for example, younger children, we could be thinking about safe play areas, constant supervision, and appropriate personal protective equipment. Additionally, as the results of the survey suggested, parents are relying on supervision and rules as the main safety measures for protecting their children on farms. While these are important, they also rely on human behaviour, and sometimes a lack of concentration may mean that these aren't as effective. So considering higher levels of risk control could be appropriate. So this could include eliminating a hazard, substituting it for something that's safer, or implementing engineering controls that might make a hazard safer. When children are at an age and development level that they can engage in some tasks on the farm, ensuring that developmentally appropriate activities are completed and children are provided with proper training and constant supervision and PPE. Having open and regular conversations about farm safety as a family can be really important. Parents should role model the correct behaviours. Children are always watching what adults are doing around them and perceive what they see as the accepted behaviour. And finally, a shift in culture needs to happen to put safety at the front of farmers' minds and make it a topic that is able to be openly talked about and not shied away from. And this will assist us in protecting our future generations from experiencing avoidable injuries. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessie.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure everybody got a lot out of that, and some of those statistics may or may not have been surprising to some of our audience. Just a reminder for everybody, if you have a question, you can pop it into the Q&A chat area, and we will work through those once we have heard from Amity. So take it away.
Can you see my screen? Is that all right?
Yes, we can see you.
Excellent and great. Okay, so I feel as though Jessie and Jacquie have done all the theoretical heavy lifting for me, which is wonderful, and happy Farm Safety Week and happy Friday. So I'm really hoping that now you can sit back and relax as I take you through many, many photos to demonstrate intergenerational change, building on Farm Safe's fabulous topic of recipes. Just a little note that Mrs. Thomas Dunstan will be relevant as we pop through these slides. Oh dear. Excellent. So my aim this afternoon is to demonstrate our on-farm changes over 3 generations at Tlangatuk East, which is 60 kilometres south of Horsham and 100 kilometres north of Hamilton, basically in between Melbourne and Adelaide. And I'll be doing this through recipes, farm machinery and stories. There's some really strong parallels that we can draw between recipes and farm family safety. There's legacies. It's blurry. There's infrastructure and there's machinery and equipment that is old and aging and new. It's also really interesting when we think about family and role modelling behaviours, which we've got all the science behind this. I mean, I know to mix scones using a flat bread knife, as my grandma showed me how to do it. There's many things we can find in all families where we can pick up on how we've been taught by those who are older than us. We've also can be quite intergenerational risk appetite and risk tolerance. Many farm businesses may have very low appetites to risk and aiming for debt-free enterprises, whereas maybe over generational change, that tolerance is adapted to suit the economic climate and your mindset. And thinking also about farms, not many of us move. My family, the Dunstans, moved from Werribee to Tlangatuk East in 1957, but we haven't moved since. For the people who I'm about to introduce to you in my slides, we all share exactly the same distance to Horsham, and same distance for market access for grain. And when it comes to recipes, we can't just pop down to the Prahran market to get an obscure vegetable to cook with. We really are in a fixed place, mainly, and often a really long way away from central business districts. So welcome to the Dunstan family. The first photo on your left is my husband's grandma, Grandma Kate. She nearly made 100 years of age, 6 months short. I live in her house. She and her husband, Bill, moved here. And the middle photo is my mother-in-law. Now, this is the perfect picture of Sue Dunstan. Sue is in that photo. She is live broadcasting with ABC Wimmera Radio with a cooking demonstration because she loves food and loves cooking. So that is just the perfect photo. She and her husband, Tom Sr., built their house next door to where I'm currently Zooming right now. And of course, here's our family photo taken this year. There's my husband, Tom, and our 2 children, Clive and Camilla, and we have successfully transitioned and completed transition through farm succession. So we are the current generation. Also was thinking about this photo earlier today, and Grandma Kate was from a farming family. She lived next door to Bill Dunstan. Sue Dunstan, Sue is from Mountagup near Hamilton. Her grandma and uncle were farmers there, and my grandparents farmed at Bradvale near Skipton. So 3 women have actually, from a farming backgrounds, have married Dunstan men. Let's go cooking. I'm really lucky to have Grandma Kate's recipes. Grandma Kate she had ducks, geese, pigs, dairy cows, sheep, an orchard, gardens. The recipes were really simple: flour, eggs, milk, sugar, butter. I think that little cutout was from the Weekly Times, and for her handwritten recipes of pound cake and sago plum pudding. She had an IXL kitchen stove, which collapsed by the time I'd moved into this house. And you generally made a pudding to bulk out that protein of meat, and while using a hot oven, though she rarely went to town. Moving through next generation, this is what you'd find at Sue's house among hundreds of cookbooks. Her shelves are just jam-packed, being a real foodie. But as we can see, we're starting to see some photos in these recipes. Meals in Minutes was interesting. We're starting to recognise perhaps women aren't always tied to the kitchen to cook because they're busy and working off farm or working. And in uploading recipes, we've got Quince Jelly by Sue Dunstan. Sue uploads recipes. She has a cooking segment on the ABC. She is online and present in the world of recipes. And stepping forward to be a little bit where we are now, there's this real sort of food ethnography and food journeys happening with these almost coffee table style recipe books, which evoke climates and settings and the history of the food. I mean, here we've got a Yottamottalengi recipe for a pomelo salad. Well, I've never seen pomelos in Coles in Horsham. I should look harder, shouldn't I? And then there's Matt Moran's photos of his children eating strawberries and beautifully set table. And the pictures, the photography is just beautiful. So again, it's changed since the days of very simple recipes. Oh, I needed to add, the other recipe book for Grandma Kate had all the farmers' wives with their husbands' names down the side. But let's talk farming. I went for a walk around to prepare for today, and we have the community district sheep dip on our farm. It was built in 1914. And all of the farmers used to share, they'd have a turn of dipping sheep in arsenic. Once everyone had finished dipping, the arsenic and the water was pumped out into the creek nearby. And those top 2 photos of what's left there. And then below we have our cattle yards, which were built by Tom, my husband's father, and his grandfather, in late 1960s. It was last used in 2001 when the last of beef cattle left the property. There was a metal crush to hold the stock, so it wasn't just all timber. But as you can see, they're not used, and it's definitely very different to what we see at the field days now, or of what we should be using for that really safe modern technology for handling large animals. And here we have a bale elevator, fairly labour intense. Workers stood on the ground, feeding small bales up the elevator onto the back of the truck or into the shed with an unguarded petrol-driven machine. And this is in our wool shed. There's a window before, you can see the window in the foreground. There used to be a big diesel engine in there with a leather belt that was actually attached to that drive pipe. So Tom's dad actually modernised it by lifting that electric engine up higher. So that's kind of the safer version. We don't have any stock on the farm, so this isn't used. Tom just runs it now and then to make sure it still works. But look, I'm relatively tall, and I always get worried that my hair could somehow get caught in that pipe. Again, unguarded, but thankfully not used. And again, here's a lot of the machinery that was used by Tom's parents and is still on our farm today. Very high labour intensive field bins, small trucks, tractors. Now the little blue Ford, you can't start it unless it is in gear, so there's no ability to lean up and turn the key on. However, it's not a standardized ROP, so I really don't like that tractor. And the Chamberlain, which were used for all the cropping back in the day. Of course, not used so much now, but they still remain here. And then this is what Tom and I have bought in the last couple of years. We're moving into mass management with trucks and trailers, and especially we're progressing to a B-double next year. We have a 110-foot shifter, and if you look, there's a meridian. Under the word meridian, that's an emergency shut-off switch. So it's pretty easy to lean over and hit it, which is, I think, is a really great safety feature. And you're also not lifting and pulling like you do with the usual auger because it is self-propelled. And we have stuff. Look, we've got motorbikes with helmets, but you know, there's things that move and there's things that are noisy. Mother bin was probably one of the best things we bought just to get rid of field bins. And we are the generation of the side-by-side. Jackie went through those stats. And it is easy to put the seatbelt behind you rather than put it on. And of course, we've sold the trailing boom spray, and we have a self-propelled sprayer with a charcoal filter, and there's less and less ability to touch chemicals as we cam lock and pump into hoppers. So improving the recipe. This again is all from my experience. Starting with the method. The best thing I did was participate in peer-to-peer learning. Again, Jackie mentioned that. The ability to, whether it's slugs in stubble for your emerging crop and all those issues, or whether it's farm safety, it's really valuable when you have like-minded people to talk to and learn from others, and also understanding the health science behind farm safety, because this is a science. I 20 years ago used to teach level 2 OH&S, and there was never really that science, that human science behind the theory, such as the maths of what level decibels can you listen to for how long time until your hearing is permanently affected. So I really wish that there was, being able to convey that science really helps make the decisions when it comes to making farms safer. We choose to invest in safety, and that is probably a little bit of that differentiational in that family role modelling space. And we make farm safety equal to all of our business decision making and a topic of conversation. So the ingredients, PPE on everything. You can reach goggles and earmuffs with anything that moves or has noise. If you buy it in bulk, it's cheaper, and we also, rules are no excuses, that must be worn. We also know that spending more buys newer and safer technology. Money does buy safety. Charcoal filters, shut-off switches, get rid of those field bins. Anything that's really high intense with manual labour is generally safer because we are running a continuous cropping farm. And we also role model positive behaviour. farmers are notorious for not putting seatbelts on when they're driving around the farm. And I do still have arguments with Tom regularly about why won't you put a seatbelt on? But he realizes that he's being watched by a very active 14-year-old. So we are very aware that we're watched, and we role model good behaviour. So wearing PPE, not driving too fast, caution and safety checks around vehicles before you move them. And we talk about the hazards. We talk about why Dad at the age of 49 needs a hearing aid. And we talk about how Pa has 2 hearing aids, but still might not be able to hear very much. So please be careful when you're out in the yards. And Nana doesn't look too far and she's not very quick. So we really need to be aware of these 2 elderly hazards on our farm who we love dearly, but we are mindful of them and mindful that we don't want our children having hearing issues when they're older. So finally, my tips and tricks to improve farm safety. It takes time. It takes time to update machines. It doesn't happen overnight. Intergenerational change with farm succession is slow. There are hangovers and there are traditions and that are in place. And it's an evolving science. We're working, Jacquie and I are working on some projects looking at technology transferal into agricultural machination. There's available technologies. How we adapt into ag is changing. It's also a mindset change. I've made it our generation's priority for farm safety. And I've also learned as a daughter-in-law that it's very hard to influence as an outsider. 5-10 years ago, if I had told my in-laws that there should be a set of earmuffs on every machine, they would have bought me a pair of earmuffs for Christmas and said, take them with you. We've changed that. We don't want any excuse of, well, they're not on me. And we are spending more money that probably horrifies them. But this is our recipe to make our farm safer. And I'm leaving you with a photo of my kitchen, which is Grandma Kate's kitchen. They are chipboard cupboards, and the insides are still the forest green that she painted them with the 1960s, 70s modernisation of the handles. There hasn't been money spent on my kitchen apart from a few coats of paint and a newer stove. But I'll leave you with, like recipes, we live with numerous generational farming legacies. So it's our responsibility to the next generation to improve the recipe for farm safety. And thanks to Annabelle for all of her tech support as we have shared our Farm Safety Week stories with you all. And thank you for coming to listen.
Thanks so much, Amity. That was great, and thanks for sharing. And thank you to your family.
Thanks, Grandma Kate and Sue.
For allowing some insight into some of the conversations that no doubt you've had over the years around farm safety and around implementing some of those changes. And as you said, it's a long game, and we all need to be in it for the long haul.
Absolutely.
So thank you to Jessie as well. Thank you to both of you. And so what we will do now is we've got about 15 minutes to have some Q&A, and I noticed there are some questions already coming through in the Q&A. And I did notice some hands up throughout as we were talking. So perhaps if you've got, did the people that had their hands up, I think, was it Jim had his hand up during Jessie's presentation. So Jim, if you wanted to pop a comment in the Q&A or the chat, we can answer your question. But first of all, I've got a question for Jessie. If you could target one hazard in a farm safety campaign to reduce farm incidents for children, what would it be? What would your one hazard to target be?
Oh, a very good question. I think, I'm not sure, but I think probably the most predictable one I'll go with, but quad bikes, I think, is still a real hazard on our farms, responsible for a large majority of the injuries. From my survey, I didn't present the results, but over 50% of children are still riding on quad bikes and over 30% are actually driving them. And we know that children under 16 should not ever be on a quad bike because of their danger, particularly squashing. So I think that they're probably still something we should be targeting, as we wouldn't ever want anyone to look back in hindsight, knowing that it was dangerous and they shouldn't probably be on it, but thinking that it wouldn't happen to them. So I think quad bikes is a good one to target.
Yeah, thanks. That's and it's a really I think it'll be a really topical issue for years to come. As I mentioned earlier, it's a long game, so change, and I think we are already starting to see we're starting to see a shift, and I'm not sure whether either of you agree, starting to see a shift in the mindset around quad bikes and understanding their hazardous nature, and I guess the nature of what can happen if it does happen to you. So yeah, that's I think that's a really good one. I've got a question for Amity. Just while we're speaking on the theme of children, how do you think farm safety tech will look out for your children in future? What could it look like? What could it look like? Yeah. What do you sort of?
Yeah, look, I think there'll be better interoperability between models. We have, as you know, we have challenges shifting blue to red to green to yellow. The whole concept of head-mounted displays and head-up displays is a really interesting space. We know already that, look, it's not so much the large cropping tractors that are being tipped or rolled or crushing people. However, we're really trying to work on the space where we know that farmers will come on a swivel chair, probably do it quite well. Farmers spend a lot of time looking over their shoulders, what's behind, and there's a real aversion to wearing a seatbelt. Again, and also there's the movement up and down. So if we can start, and we know that nothing's quite going to replace that ability to look behind at the implement on ground. But if we can start using, say, stuff fitted inside glasses is the tech where we're moving to. So if you if we're wearing sunglasses, there'll be digital readings of particular things, reflections onto screens to try and reduce that spinning, and keep the operator informed as much as possible, and try and keep them safe at the same time. And also be able to take these glasses and the head-up displays into different vehicles is where I think that it'll be going. And look, we've also got the swarm technologies and automated machines, but I think just before we get to that, there will be probably more haptics or that warning perception and opticals happening first, because that's already happening in other industries. And, you know, we are looking at those other industries and how we can transfer those techs over to ag, and then really work on that adoption. And when we can combine technology with productivity, which is also safer, we're all going to win, because we know that there's significant market failure when it comes to farm safety products. Who makes the money out of it? It's very preventative rather than reactive, yeah.
And culturally, what do you see as being, talking about adoption and having those conversations around creating or investing in safety? Culturally, what do you think we need to help facilitate that?
Yeah, look, we need to peer-to-peer, and it's really hard to get farmers off farms. I know that, and the field days are becoming less and less. But again, if we can keep, if the tech and the tech industries can keep talking to the farmers and keep peer-to-peer learning, keep talking, keep troubleshooting, keep trialing, to have that culture around safety, productivity coupled together. I think, yeah. And look, we have to keep talking to farmers. I mean, they're the ones that know why they have to turn around. And the best thing you do is have a conversation with your husband and say, why don't you put your seatbelt on more often? You get a good reason for that. But we need to have more of those conversations with every farmer of why don't you do X? Because it's generally, farmers are very sensible and intelligent beings. There's going to be a reason why they're not adopting all of this farm safety stuff that we as farm researchers want them to.
Yep. Yep, spot on. So we've also got another question in here, and don't be scared to pop your questions in the Q&A. We've got a few more minutes to keep having a conversation. So really lay them on us, and we'll we'll do our best to answer. And I'll open this out to both of you, Amity and Jessie. In terms of shared ownership of safety in the industry, what are your thoughts on the role or the responsibility we place on an individual farmer? What do you see about what are your thoughts on the shared ownership of farm safety culture outside of the individual on farm?
Jessie, do you want to have it? If you got any words, or do you want me?
Oh, you go first.
Look, I think we're finding that when it comes to legislation, that our Occupational Health and Safety Act puts everything on the responsible person. And that responsible person, as an employer or farmer, individual worker on a farm, or got your family on the farm, that responsible person is the farmer. So in terms of my husband, Tom is the responsible person for all safety for visitors, contractors, family, which is a lot of responsibility. When you think about that, their interrelations with peers, family to some degree, neighbours, community, there needs to be greater support to help farmers be that responsible person. Because for a corporate farm, that responsibility can then also be put up to the boardroom, and that's where it's easier to spend the money on the big machines. So in terms of corporate farms, I think that they can share that ownership well or better than the family farming unit. What would be great would be a mechanism to help people like our trusted advisors, our bank managers, to somehow have an element of farm safety embedded or funded or subsidised. No, I don't like using that word, but just to try, again, that market failure in safety is what probably we need to address, to shift that responsibility back up off the farmer.
Yeah, and that then facilitates that normalisation of a safety conversation, and less of that, and perhaps redirects that pressure around decision making and what's the best decision to make, which can be so paralysing.
Yeah,
if you're not sure where to start, you know it's an issue, but you just don't know how to start.
It'd be great to have. Sorry, the support. I know that we've looked at Michigan Farm Bureau last year. They've got some great incentives. You can insure with them. You get discounts for machinery. There's farm safety contact people to call and have a chat that's non-litigious. And I know we don't have the population of the United States, but look, if you get a chance, pop onto the Michigan Farm Bureau website. I think it'd be a fantastic model for Australia. But we need to start thinking outside the box and working with our trusted advisors to work with us and letting them be able to have that mechanism to work effectively with farmers. Yep.
And Jessie, I've got one for you. Just to as we finish up, in terms of what would be one of the biggest findings that you're seeing in terms of your parent responses and conversations that they are having with their children and families? What are your thoughts there in terms of your work and conversations we could be having with parents around safety culture?
Yeah, well, I guess like the most surprising thing was how parents identified they don't think there is enough resources available. So therefore, maybe they're having trouble knowing how to have those conversations and what they should be implementing on their farms. And yes, but overall, parents are having constant conversations with their children on hazards on the farm. So obviously that is happening. But yeah, I think we just need to have some more education available to them. Maybe how Amity was talking about peer-to-peer, maybe we need to have some gatherings to make it more of a thing that people are talking about with each other. Bringing families together would probably be a good way to go about that too.
Great. And I'll just go through the final two questions in our Q&A, and we have one that was not dissimilar to the last discussion that we just had around industry and taking some of that pressure off the individual, and it's about any other industry people involved in ag. How can they contribute to that shared ownership beyond the responsibility of the farmer? And I can answer that somewhat. I think it's about helping people who assist farmers and are and this is where we talk about trusted advisors, understanding their role. And that often it's not necessarily to conduct a farm inspection, but it's about the conversation or helping answer or helping point someone in the right direction to help them with their decision making about safety. If people in industry are asked a question around safety, being able to point them, having the resources and a bit of knowledge to point them in the right direction to help solve it. For example, encouraging someone to have the VFF come out and have the Making Our Farm Safer team come out and assist with a walk around. You know, that might be a good place to start. But also, if we can normalise the conversation, if we can normalise positive conversation around safety, that will make it easier for people who work for the ag professionals who are working and assisting and are trusted and are sometimes neighbours and family members of farmers to have the have the conversation or bring something up if yards are not quite up to scratch, or if if you think they could do with a chemical shed to better house their chemicals, creating an environment where offering some tips and tricks depending on your knowledge, I think is where we really need to go and where we need to be, just to normalise that conversation. If someone notices something that could be made safer. And that leads into the next question, which was how do we encourage safety practices to the livestock agent or agronomist or shearer that comes on farm. And again, I think I'm taking I think that really comes down to that demonstrating safe behaviour. So, or not behaviour, demonstrating safe practice. That again adds to that normalisation of, well, this is a safe way to conduct this activity, and being aware of what is unsafe, and feeling comfortable enough to and remembering that you are trusted by the person that you're talking to. So have confidence in the relationship that you have with your clients. I think that is really important. And the more we normalize safety conversation, the more that relationship can be built to include safety in discussions between agents and agronomists and shearers and even agribusiness advisors when people are putting together their budgets. You know, I think it plays just as an important role in that environment too. And that brings, hopefully you've all found that informative. I know I have. I've really enjoyed having a conversation with Amity and Jessie here and with you all as those questions have come through. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much to Amity and Jessie for the work that you're doing as well. The more information we have, the more information we can share and the more resources we can help develop to making those decisions easier. Thank you very much, and thank you to the team at the National Centre for the work you're all doing to help create this culture of safety conversation.
Mm-hmm.